Sheba, years ago, you had mentioned to me that you wanted to create a statewide conference. Last year at our collective work retreat, we do a retreat with collective work, and you said when we were talking about our goals that 2025 was the year. I was able to attend the Virginia Justice Conference. I was one of over 300 people for the inaugural conference. I just want you to tell us how your story led to creating the inaugural Virginia Justice Conference.
So I see a lot of new faces. I am born and raised in Richmond, Virginia, Churchill native. I lived here until I was about 19. I went to school at Norfolk State, and I think I was like number 4 in my class, 203 John Marshall had. And I dropped out the first year. I got pregnant with my first child. I decided to return back home to Richmond, and in that time I worked odd jobs. I worked at a body shop in Henrico. I was hired to assist the assistant who had been there 6 years before I started. I worked there about a year and a half, got pregnant again, and I was laid off because work was slow. I want y'all to understand what being laid off means. I was paid unemployment. It was through no wrongdoing of my own. 2 years later, I returned back to school. My mom and my brother used to keep my kids while I commuted back and forth to Norfolk until we found a place. In that time, a detective went to my home and left his card and asked to speak to me about the young lady who I was hired to assist. She had got caught red-handed stealing from the company to the tune of about $51,000. When she got caught, she pointed the finger at me. Even though there was no proof, there was no additional spending, I didn't have anything in my bank account to support this. I gone down and spoken to this detective, and he allowed me to leave, and the next week he sent detectives to my home from Norfolk and arrested me and put my kids in CPS custody. After a 3-day trial, my court-appointed attorney kept trying to get me to take a plea, and I refused to take a plea because I had done no wrongdoing. He did not inform me that my co-defendant / co-worker was suffering from substance use disorder. She had been previously convicted of a credit card fraud charge. He told me that credit card fraud was not the same as embezzlement. And after a 3-day trial, the only black person in the courtroom, I was convicted based solely on her pointing the finger at me. She was also convicted and went to prison because this was her second offense. And I didn't find out until years later when I lost my barber's license for 16 months that she had this substance use disorder and that she had previously been convicted, and it was $51,000 because I was only charged with $5,662 for every receipt that I signed. That wrongful conviction happened in 2004, and at the time, I was ashamed. I did not share my story. I did not tell anybody. My kids didn't know. I suffered in silence through all of the collateral consequences that come with the conviction. And if you're familiar with that, collateral consequences are things that people are stripped of who have been touched by the justice system, because it's not just a conviction. Sometimes it's an arrest, right? It's about 46,000 of those. I wasn't able to chaperone my kids on field trips. I wasn't able to be an organ donor recipient for certain things. I wasn't able to volunteer at different places, because we all know about housing and employment. We don't think about education and losing federal scholarships and things like that. So that was where my personal journey began. But prior to that, both of my parents were arrested when I was 10 years old. My dad was working at Huguenot High School. Go ahead, Amy.
That's
my mom worked for RCAP. My mom worked for a community-based organization called RCAP, but in the 80s, crack cocaine was a thing. There was no treatment. When my parents were arrested for their substance use disorder, they got handcuffs. And at the age of 63, when I lost my mom on election day in 2021, she was still being denied housing for the thing that happened in 1989. My dad did 19 and a half years in Greensville Correctional Center, Department of Corrections. My sister was wrongfully arrested in 1999. I had custody of my 2 nieces and my own 3-month-old child. I don't know who decided to put me in charge of 3 people's kids. My sister was ultimately acquitted 6 months later, but she learned that in order to get this thing removed from her record that she was found not guilty of, she had to pay $98 per charge, go before a judge and ask permission to have a thing removed from her record, and be fingerprinted again. She refused to be fingerprinted again for a very long time. That is how I got involved in expungement work, and in 2021 we passed the first ever historic expungement bill for people with convictions that will take effect next year, July 1, 2026. And when we talk about the conference, y'all gotta have like the backdrop of how we got to this conference. I worked on abolishing the death penalty, even though I had a childhood friend and a 15-year-old son who were killed in a domestic violence situation. It was a capital murder case. We abolished the death penalty in 2021. Shout out to Dr. Cook, who's here, and Rob, who may be somewhere here. Long time coming because of the history. The bill around probation reform and pretrial reform, all of those were directly things that I was directly impacted in my life for people who I cared about. So I started the organization 9 years ago. I was like, I gotta do this conference. I wanna bring people together, but I wasn't ready. 2024, I was like, we're on year 9. 2025 gotta be the year. And it gotta be my test run. And by test run, I mean in my Virgo brain, I did it in 35 days and we got 323 people registered.
Yeah, Virgo.
It was important to me to bring people together who are directly impacted and have them clash with people who make decisions and make policy and let them know that they too could be a part of this journey. I host an advocacy training and I do a series of them. I do a 4-week class now. In November, I do 1-day trainings. We do training specifically to certain policy. I am a co-author of the Second Look Bill, which addresses extreme sentencing, which has categorically been denied every year for the past 4 years, but we got the furthest we've ever gotten because it went to the Senate floor last year, and in 2026 it will be our year to address extreme
Just about to say, we're gonna get further.
The idea for the conference was to bring people together from all across the state to collaborate on data, direct service, and making things happen. The storytelling piece was important because I share my story everywhere now. My kids work with me, they know the story. My baby girl, who's 22, has her criminal justice degree at VCU and she's back in grad school. She won't stop going to school. Last year they talked about our right to vote bill. And she texted me and said, "Ma, they talking about you in class." I said, "Did you tell them that I was your mother?" She was like, "Absolutely not." And this year, she said, "Mom, you're talking about the Second Look bill." I said, "Did you tell them I was your mother?" She was like, "Absolutely not." I said, "Girl, you gotta leverage what you know." And she was like, "You know, I wanna earn this on my own." But she is more aware. My daughters testified for the first time in General Assembly as a result of knowing people who lived through these experiences. So TCI is responsible for the data and collections and numbers, and I'm a numbers person if y'all know me. I have concussion brain from an accident back in September, but I'm a numbers person. But I look at us, and I think about the things that we experience, and I look at people, and sometimes the data is not always numbers. It is people, and it's experiences, and it's feelings. So to bring the conference together, we had every single partner who was a vendor, it was about 50. We had about 48 speakers, are people that I've worked with in the past 9 years, every single one. Every vendor that came through were people or resources that I have relied on to build the thing. So while you see the organization, it's only 3 of us who are full-time employees, the work was hundreds of people across this state that needed to come together to figure out where we go from here. And we got this election done, and next year we will also be pushing our constitutional amendment to finally end felony disenfranchisement from our Constitution.